Welcome to the fifth annual Pineapple Support Mental Health Summit. This is our 2024 summit. And if you've seen that promotion just absolutely flooding social media, which we've been so passionate in doing, you know that this is a series all about relationship dynamics within the adult industry. We've had two wonderful days so far. We discussed romantic relationships. We discussed family ties, family relationships, and today is a very important focus that we are putting on professional relationships. It can be a murky, a challenging arena to navigate, as we know that this is a community of like-minded folks, so we find friendships within them, but we are independent empires in our own right as adult creators and as adult performers. So there is this wonderful balance to strike. So all of you coming in, if you do feel that this is a presentation that could benefit other people's lives as well, please share the social media. Please do share the link with them. Let them know that at the top of our second hour at 2 p.m. Eastern, we have a fabulous open panel discussion. So you'll be hearing from a really beautifully curated list of experts and legacy performers that are going to weigh in with some real life lived wisdoms, experiences about how they navigate the professional relationships in this industry. So delighted to have all of you here. And without further ado, just before I announce this, I should actually get to one of the most important details of this summit in particular, and that is our sponsors. Keeping this service available, keeping this resource available that is Pineapple Support is made possible by some wonderful people. And those sponsors for this year's summit are Pornhub, C4S, Strip Chat, Cam4, F2F, Feet Fix, Fan Shop, and Feel Hub X. So thank you so much for keeping this summit going and being a sponsor to this enormous effort. All of you watching in the chat, remember it's the season of giving and receiving. So maybe as you're considering where to put some love and investments, we do have donations available to grant to Pineapple Support year-round on our website. We have a donation page, and it would be wonderful to see some support continue. So now we may begin, and I would love to introduce you to someone who is so influential, so seasoned, and so expert at the way they relay information in the mental health sphere. I'm delighted to announce to you today's presenter. We have the fabulous Nigel Cook. Nigel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you kindly for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and get everything set up here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work Friends with Benefits, How to Create and Maintain Professional Relationships with Colleagues. As was mentioned, my name is Nigel Cook, and I'm going to go over just some brief introductions about me and why I am passionate about this topic. So, as we dive in, just want to start by sharing that I am a licensed clinical social worker here in the state of Missouri. I do all things mental health all day, every day. I am also specifically a certified sex therapist. My background is primarily in working with survivors of sexual violence, or people who are engaging in consensual sex work practices, or people who are just exploring their sexual identity, whether that is their orientation, their gender, their kinks, their fetishes. I am happy to talk about it all. In addition to that, I am also a pineapple support therapist, and so I really try to be as much of an advocate and ally as much as possible because I am not a sex worker myself, but I am very passionate about supporting the rights of people to do with their body what they want to do with their body. I also do a lot of education here at local universities, so trying to influence the next generation of therapists to do the same and support the cause. So I would love to invite everyone to feel welcome to share who you are, what you do, and what you love in the chat. I am one of those people that just uses a single straight screen, so I can't monitor both the chat and this at the same time, but know that I will try to get to it and know that you are seen and heard regardless. So let's talk a little bit about our objectives for today. So by the end of this presentation, we're going to have covered a bunch of different topics, all related to workplace dynamics. So first, we're going to start talking about how dynamics emerge within the workplace and the impacts that they have on our satisfaction, our performance, our just overall well-being in the work that we do. I also am very much a person who loves giving strategies and loves having people walk away from webinars with things in their tool belt to think about, reflect on, consider, utilize in their practice. So we're going to talk about common strategies to manage internal responses to workplace conflicts, and as well as strategies to utilize, in engaging in these workplace conflicts. And I also just want to conclude with this idea of community care as a sustainability practice. So as was mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a community and a lot of people have a lot of shared values. And so figuring out how do we support one another, both personally and professionally. I also recognize that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is rooted in like very technical, sometimes even jargony mental health language. And so as we're going through it, I would just encourage you all to use this as a springboard, but also maybe talk with your own therapist. So reaching out to a pineapple support therapist, talking with your team members, so your advocates, the people on your side, just anyone who might be supporting you in some way, shape, or form. And also considering that some of what I'm going to be sharing today is about boundaries and the importance of saying no or walking away. And sometimes there are contracts or legal ramifications from doing that. So just make sure to consult whatever policies or, legal contracts you need to consult as well. But let's start with just a general question of why do we even work? Like when we're all asked as young people, what do we want to be when we grow up? And, it's instilled in us from an early age that, we need to be working in some way, shape, or form. But like, why do we do that? What drives us? And so this is going to be the game show portion of the presentation. We'll do it Family Feud style, but we surveyed 100 people and asked them, what are the reasons you all do this job? And the answers were things like being passionate or excited about opportunities. You got bills to pay, and this job is one way to accomplish that goal. You want to have an impact in your community. So meet cool people, do cool things, and support people who are looking for support in various different ways. You want to be a part of this community and recognize that it's doing really cool things and have that sense of belonging. Some people use it just to feel sexy or to feel other positive, impacts in their life. So whether it's pride, self-esteem, accomplishment. You also might be healing from previous experiences, and this is one way of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and doing something that is, a fun, pleasant, positive experience, which leads us to having fun or just loving doing the job. So there's a lot of reasons to lean in and do work and really make this what you want to make of it. I think a lot of this field is a lot of self-employment or self-motivation, like people who are go-getters who want to, build the job that they want to build for themselves. And like there's a fun to that. There's an opportunity to that. I've also been using this language of like workplace dynamics a few times throughout this presentation, but like let's talk about what that even is or what that entails. So when I say workplace dynamic, really what I mean is any way that colleagues or coworkers are interacting, engaging, collaborating with one another to achieve a shared employment goal. That is probably the most vague HR language I could have found, but really it's the idea of just the way that we interact with other people while we are working. Taking that even a step further, these interactions, they can be positive, negative, or anywhere in between. And so it can be you're working with your BFF and you're excited about this cool project that you're working on, or maybe you just want to show up, clock in, get paid, and move on. Like these are all workplace dynamics that can exist. There's a myriad of ones, and there's no way that we can possibly cover all of them. But really, when I say workplace dynamic, I just mean when you're on the job, interacting with other people. And so also in thinking about what, work entails, there's usually this idea of professionalism. And we use that word a lot, and we sort of intuitively have an idea of what professionalism means. But like, let's just break down what people are typically defining as professionalism in society. So the idea that you need to treat your coworkers kindly, be respectful, be polite, like, just the golden rule, do unto others as they would do, as you would have, all that. Putting forth your best effort. So trying, showing up, doing good, high quality work, like trying to, be a team player, achieve that goal, showing up on time. So, like timeliness, being places when you say you're going to be places, following through on what you say you're going to do. And then we also have not talking about work stuff outside of the office, wearing appropriate, typically meaning non revealing attire, not talking about inappropriate topics like sex, and not mixing business with pleasure. And so, really, this leads to a conversation of this can't always apply within the field of sex work practices. Like, typically, what we think of as stereotypical professionalism sometimes is the responsibility of the job. And so, thinking through how do we create what professionalism means? And really, the reality is, professionalism means whatever people are unanimously agreeing on and defining it as within a given field or profession. So, as you are in this work, you have probably picked up on intuitive pieces of what professionalism looks like. And maybe it aligns with some of this. Maybe there are other additional things. I welcome you to include in the chat what professionalism means to you in the context of this field. So, similar to how we are defining professionalism, we also have to define this work aspect of sex work. So, sex work as a concept, again, I'm just going broad, overarching definitions, the exchange of erotic energy for money or whatever the equivalent might be. And really, it's in the eye of the beholder. Like, sex work means to you whatever it means to you. I have had clients who think it means engaging in body focused work. I have had clients who think it, just means dancing or just means performing in adult entertainment. I've had some clients who think it or who identify it as like writing erotic stories. And so they're a smut writer, and that's how they engage in their sex work practices and express themselves sexually. But when we think about sex work systemically, or as an industry or as a field, it involves so much more than just that moment of erotic exchange, that body work, that dancing, that filming, that whatever. So there's all the performing elements, but we also have all of the things that go into it, like the scheduling, like doing all of the prep and planning and traveling and trying to coordinate calendars, all of the ways that that you take care of yourself before, during, and after, all of the potential paperwork and taxes and billing and trying to figure that out. And then marketing, probably one of the biggest aspects of this job. How do you put yourself out there? How do you, advertise your services? How do you, bring in the clients? How do you continue being in opportunities where you can do all of the performing that people typically think of as being what sex work is? And then also, sex work as a field can occur in a variety of places. Many people, they do it from the comfort of their own bedroom. They, set up cams or, just get all their work done in their home space. Some people go to sets or studios. Sometimes you have to go to places like Zoom meetings. Like there's tons of different places where the office or the workplace can be. And so social media is really the big one that I'd like to talk about. So much of sex work as a field is stigmatized by people who are not in this field, but it is also an avenue through which many people are doing that marketing, are putting themselves out there, not only to get clientele, but also to meet other people who are also doing this work, finding people who have those shared experiences, who have, that common ground. It's also where, the opportunity to meet people to collaborate on projects comes in. And so figuring out how do you reach out to somebody on social media? Maybe you have a shared demographic that you both appeal to, and you want to broaden both of your demographics by doing a content trade or a collaboration with one another. Some of the, additional things, potentially dangers of social media is trying to identify who is a coworker, meaning the person that they are, versus the coworker, the brand that they are putting out there. So sometimes we have workplace dynamics where, this is our friend, our buddy, like I know them at their core and we hang out and we have all these shared values, but they have to show up and be something completely different. Like I've seen this in a lot of people who are working with maybe they're friends with their supervisor, but their supervisor is in charge when they are on the clock, or, just coworkers who are working at the same place. And then also this idea that because of social media in this field, you're almost on the clock constantly. Like there isn't typically a 9 to 5 that exists. Like you find time when you're going to work, you make that schedule what you will. Sometimes it means you are meeting with people at 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes it means, you are scheduled for a shoot between 1 to 5 on Friday. But just this idea that there it is hard to take a step back from these work responsibilities because the work is always coming and always going. And we see this in a lot of, just self-employed people throughout society. Like it's the idea of if you're your own boss, you have to actively be doing things. And if you're not working, then the business is not growing. And we all want businesses to grow. We all want to be successful in some way. And so the a reality that I share oftentimes with my students who are social workers, which we also abbreviate to SW, is the idea that no social worker or no sex worker is an island. There has to be this need to reach out and build connection, whether it is for emotional support, whether it is for logistics within the practice. Collaboration is a must. Like there has to be some interaction with other people who are also involved in this work. Even if you are just filming content alone, in your own home, not interacting with other people, you still might have to interact with other people, who are doing the billing for whatever system that you are using, or reaching out to the IT people on any of the platforms that you might be on, or even just, interacting with other people who are looking for support or maybe offering opportunities. There's also the idea of your coworkers are not only fellow sex workers who are doing the same job as you, but also it could be things like directors or agents or crew, the marketing team that you might be utilizing. Like there's tons of different ways workplace dynamics can emerge. And there's also a ton of benefits to collaborating. So the idea of putting yourself out there means more opportunities will become available to you. People talk. This is a social field, and word of mouth can be very powerful. Another benefit is also just the opportunity to learn from one another. So, like places where people have made missteps in the past, maybe they don't want others to make those same missteps, so they are putting out information into the world for you to latch on to and use that as an opportunity to gain from that what you will. Also, a benefit of collaborating is you meet just genuinely cool people. Most of the time, people are drawn to this field because of, particular values that are shared by other people. And so it is a way of meeting people who like the same things you like. But then we also have to talk about different characters in the community that can emerge. So I was fortunate enough to sit in on the presentation yesterday that talked about things like, work wife or work husband. And so, like, just this idea of like that person who's your work spouse or your work bestie. I've talked with performers before who have this notion of like a stage name friend versus a real name friend and distinguishing between the two that way. There's also the idea of people you just don't want to interact with in this field. So people who may be on your no list or people who you just want to avoid. And when we think about relationship dynamics, something that I emphasize with all the clients that I work with is that in any relationship dynamic, there are always three people involved: person A, person B, and the actual relationship that emerges itself. Like it is almost its own character, where you can have two people, that A and B person, who share all of the same values, do all of the same things, and just don't click for whatever reason. Or you can have people who maybe do have different values, have different opinions, don't always get along on everything, but just the chemistry there is on fire. It's incredible. So Also emphasizing and giving permission that it is okay to not like all of your colleagues. Like, we just need to get it out there now where, like, you don't have to love everyone 100% enthusiastically, energetically. There's going to be people you don't vibe with, and that's okay. And you're probably going to cross paths with them in various ways or at different points. And you have to figure out what to do with that when you're maybe working with somebody that you're just not clicking with for whatever reason. The reason you need to figure out what to do with that is because workplace conflicts or these, negative workplace dynamics typically are not good for our well-being. So oftentimes when we're having conflicts with people, either directly in the workplace or maybe things from personal relationships bleeding into the workplace, it leads to decreased job satisfaction, so not loving what you do as much, increased sense of burnout, so like wanting to leave the industry or not be involved in this work anymore. It can, lower the quality of the product or output that you are producing. And so maybe just things aren't to the level you want them to be because you're so exhausted having to navigate all of the emotions associated with this conflict that you are dealing with. There's also negative health impacts on the body. So, like, we get sicker more easily when our body is under stress. Literally, like making ourselves more prone to colds, more prone to things like muscle fatigue or aches or, difficulty with sleep can also negatively impact our families, our friends, our communities, because we've all had that coworker that just becomes a character in the mind of our loved ones because we show up from work and say, "You're not going to believe what Sheila in accounting did today." And so we have to figure out what to do with this. And so I've given a lot of information about what this can potentially look like. Now we're going to start exploring what are some things that you do with this. When I was prepping for this presentation, I had a lot of like strategies in mind or things that I was thinking about that would be really helpful. And I paused to reflect to a moment and just went to the literature to say, are there things that already exist in the HR literature that, that I'm potentially duplicating? Or like, can I find evidence to back up the things that I am saying and the skills I'm offering? And I really liked this one reading that I did that talked about a two category approach to navigating workplace conflict. And basically, what it said is there are two solutions to any workplace dynamic or workplace conflict that you might be navigating, and ways that you can respond to be as professional and accomplish whatever the work goal is. Those two strategies were engage the mess and suppress the noise. So when we talk about engaging the mess, this is the approach that is all about having that difficult conversation. It is leaning in to whatever the conflict is, and naming it and claiming it. So talking to that person who's frustrating you, acknowledging that a conflict even exists, working respectfully to offer insight and show your own opinion and communicate your emotions that are related to the conflict. It's the idea of challenging avoidance. And so, like, it is so easy for us to be pissed off with a coworker or dealing with something and, have that seep into our work and feel all the negative effects and just avoid, 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 because that feels good in the short term, but maybe isn't good long term. And really, the engaging the mess is aimed at finding constructive problem solving strategies. How do we acknowledge this, address it, and move on? The second approach, suppress the noise, is how do we minimize that unnecessary conflict? Practicing that acceptance of this person is frustrating me, I'm annoyed for whatever reasons, I have to deal with this thing that is going on, and how can I appropriately set it to the side and ignore it healthily for now so that I can move on with whatever I need to do? How do you practice that self regulation or that self control or that acceptance? I think of this one as the how do you not yell at your colleague that might be really easy or maybe even deserve it based on their behaviors. I also think about this as like the finding common ground. Like, yes, there are these differences or this conflict, but what are the shared things that we can unite on and focus on that rather than whatever conflict or smaller variables might be popping up? And so as we go through, I'm going to talk about both of these and just some concrete strategies that I use with clients typically for navigating this dynamic. So let's start with engage the mess. Like I was saying, it's all about challenging that avoidance. It's about having that tough conversation. And so a few ways you can do that are just things like practicing I feel statements. And so I'll talk about this a little bit on the next slide, but like focusing it on your emotions rather than the behavior that is going on, practicing active listening skills and hearing out your colleague on whatever, their side of the conflict or perspective is. Love a good old language of help me understand whenever you are disagreeing with someone. Or even just offering that honest feedback or constructive criticism to a colleague who is maybe not engaging the way that they should engage, or being receptive to that criticism when it's being directed towards you. So, if you've ever been to therapy, you've seen that we have feelings wheels and we love them, and there's a billion and one feelings wheels that exist in the world. But when I think of communicating emotions, I think it boils down to just this simple template. I feel insert emotion word when insert situation or thing that is happening because insert underlying reason or issue. So oftentimes I'll work with people who are frustrated at colleagues and they'll come in and, they'll say, so and so's being terrible, they're awful, I just don't know what to do. And I will say, practice your I feel statements. And they'll say something to the effect of, I feel they're being, a huge bitch right now, or I feel like they're just an awful human being. And I will point to my feelings wheel and say, where is there being a bitch or they're an awful human being on this feelings wheel? And usually, what they reflect on is seeing that they're actually just in the anger category. I feel frustrated, I feel rage, I feel annoyed, I feel whatever it is because actual thing that is happening. And then we dive deeper. What is the actual reason? When we come at people and just say, I feel you're being a jerk right now, that person immediately is going to go on the defensive. It now becomes them having to protect their own self esteem and their own well being. This helps you keep it focused on the emotion and keep it away from the blame game. I also love the Laura method of active listening. So, Laura is a handy dandy acronym for how you can engage and hear feedback from others and have a conversation productively. Where really what it looks like is listen, affirm, respond, and then ask questions or add information. So, the first thing that you have to do when somebody is frustrated with you, or maybe trying to approach the conflict from their perspective, is you have to just stop and listen and hear them out. There's the second acronym of wait, why am I talking? Where it just gives you an opportunity to pause and reflect and slow down and ask yourself, like, what is the reason that I'm trying to contribute right now? And do I need to listen before I do that? Affirming is just the acknowledgement or the validation of what that other person is saying. It is reflecting that you have actually heard them as you were listening and trying to empathetically acknowledge their position before you get to the third step, which is the respond. So, like, whatever they are expressing to you, responding to it in some way. And that way can be positive, negative, anywhere in between, but just the idea of like slowing down, waiting, and being really mindful and intentional about why you're responding the way that you're responding. And then continuing the conversation by asking an additional question or adding additional information to share your perspective. What this can often look like is talking through and asking some version of a question of like, what do we do about this moving forward? Now that we've acknowledged this thing is happening, what do we do about it? Getting a little more technical, there's a DBT skill or a dialectical behavior therapy skill that is used called interpersonal effectiveness or DEARMAN. It is kind of an expanded version of the Lara method, but it's another acronym that stands for describe, explain, assert, reinforce, mindfulness, appear confident, and negotiate. And so these are things to keep in mind for how you may potentially be coming across in interaction with other people. So, like, making sure that you're being intentional about not escalating conflict or not acting solely from your emotional experience. And so, starting by just describing whatever is coming up for you, explaining your position, asserting your position, meaning like advocating for yourself, reinforcing by adding additional information or continuing the discussion, being present and centered in the moment and trying not to get distracted by extraneous things that might be coming up, and then making sure that you're maintaining eye contact, that you are practicing all of the skills that you need in order to come across as a professional, confident, assertive individual. And then that negotiation piece, what do we do about this moving forward? What can I give up in order to get something in return? And so now let's jump to suppress the noise for a second. So this is the strategy that is about working collaboratively to focus on that common ground and having that agree to disagree moment. So the conflict is still there. We are not resolving the conflict or approaching it head on, but instead we're acknowledging the conflict is there and we are ignoring it in order to continue doing whatever we have to do. Can also be the piece of just accepting that sometimes other people are going to do things that we do not like, and that is okay. They are human. Sometimes we do things that other people do not like. And so, how do you do these? Well, first, there's just the logistical emotion regulation strategies. So, I think about emotion regulation as being both a mental and a somatic process. So, from a somatic perspective, from that bottom up approach, focusing on the physical sensations in our body, ways that we can regulate our emotions are things like practicing deep breathing. And so, taking a moment to inhale through the nose, hold it, and exhale through our mouth. Sometimes when I'm working with clients and I'm like, hey, we need to practice this strategy of slowing down and taking a deep breath, what they will do is they will go, nope, still upset. And of course they are, because that is not the mindful, intentional approach to deep breathing. Sometimes it's going to take that 5 deep breaths, that 10 deep breaths, that, 100 deep breaths, whatever it might be. For those of you that maybe do not like breath work as much as other people, there's also the idea of checking in with your body through a body scan or progressive muscle relaxation. I think of this as the idea of tighter and lighter. And so taking moments to pause by doing something where you just bring tension or awareness to your body and notice the sensation of letting it go. Our bodies are very much like glow sticks. If we bend them the right way, they will glow. This is why yoga can be very healing. This is why exercise is important. All of the chemicals we need to regulate our emotions already exist in our body. We just don't always have the, awareness or ability to get them to go where they need to go. And so we have to be intentional about doing things differently. For mental strategies, I love the approach of opposite actions and cognitive reframing. Opposite action is it's this mentality of when you are noticing yourself feel an inclination to do a thing that may not be in your best interest. Say you are really pissed and mad and frustrated and you just want to throw something at somebody. Opposite action is identifying how can I literally do the opposite of whatever that behavior is. I've had many clients who deal with anger management issues, and they all say something to the effect of, people just don't like when I'm mad. I'm not allowed to have my feelings. And I will calmly reflect to them that people don't care that you are mad. People care that you're picking up chairs and throwing them at Starbucks baristas. Actions are the things that tend to have consequences. Feelings are valid. Feelings we can feel and they can be real and they can exist. And maybe they're doing what they're supposed to do, or maybe they're not. But the idea of sometimes we have to just intentionally tell ourselves to do something differently. Same when we're feeling any sort of like avoidance or hesitation or procrastination in this work, like that idea of avoiding sending that email or not editing that video on time or whatever it might be, the like desire to withdraw and, not engage in the thing, practicing that opposite action of doing the opposite and seeing what happens. Sometimes the hardest part is just that initial push to move forward. And then cognitive reframing is how can we think about this situation a little bit differently? So earlier I mentioned bottom up, meaning feelings to brain. Now I'm mentioning top down, meaning brain to body. And so cognitive reframing is, challenging areas in which you might be leaning into some type of distorted thinking. So maybe you're approaching things from an all or nothing mentality, things are either all good or all bad, and just opening up your mind to this idea of having an in between. Maybe it's this idea of, you're speaking from your emotions and slowing down and saying like, is this true? Is this accurate? Is this helpful? And so, just ways of trying to think about things differently and really encouraging yourself to, sometimes think opposite, but sometimes just think more realistic. What pieces of information might you be missing? A way that I like to do distress tolerance skills comes from EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, of resourcing or finding your safe state or your emotional container. It's like an imagery strategy where you can literally take all of the stress or frustration you might be feeling with workplace conflicts or negative work dynamics and just figuring out how do I put them somewhere else. Sometimes we need that when we are decompressing from work stress. So, like, I'll speak personally for a second. Sometimes I'm seeing 8 clients a day who are all telling me horrific stories of ways that sex has been weaponized against them, and I don't want to take that home with me. And so, on my commute, on the way home, I pass by this, restaurant that I pass by every single day, and mentally, I'm like, I'm going to leave it at the restaurant, and I'll pick it up on my way back to work tomorrow. And so just the idea of doing something symbolic to try and imagine or visualize putting this somewhere else. Another strategy that builds on that in a little more specific ways is this acronym of IMPROVE, which stands for imagery, meaning, prayer, relaxation, one thing in the moment, vacation, or encouragement. These are all similar ways of doing that. So, like, imagery is the kind of language that we typically think of when we think, find your happy place. Meaning is identifying what is the purpose of this conflict? What is it teaching me? How can I use it to help me grow? Prayer just means, existentially, what do I think is the purpose or meaning of what is happening right now? Relaxation is taking that moment to do any of the emotional regulation skills that we talked about on the previous slide. One thing in the moment is the idea of mindfulness. So, how can I focus on something pleasant in the moment while this other thing is going on as well? Vacation is what is one way I can take a small break or gain a small reprieve. Sometimes the vacation is stepping into the bathroom for 10 minutes just to compose yourself. Sometimes it's playing a quick phone game on your phone or scrolling for 5 minutes on a break. And then encouragement. What are some positive ways I can talk to myself about why I am doing this work, why I enjoy what I do, things that I feel confident in doing. And then, of course, we can't have a workplace conversation without talking about boundaries in some way, shape, or form. So it's this idea of a set of expectations for how you plan to respond to certain behaviors. And I see a lot of people get boundaries wrong in the sense of what they are often talking about are like ultimatums, like demands placed on other people of how they are supposed to act and behave. And that's not really what a boundary is. Like, we're not trying to enforce our will on other people, but instead, we are just making sure that they are aware of all expectations and what the consequences of their behaviors might be. And so, like, a boundary would not be something like, you need to treat me right. A boundary would be, if you're not going to treat me right, then I don't want to be in a relationship with you. Like, that is the consequence of the intended behavior. And so, really, boundaries fall to the individual to reinforce them. Our boundaries typically don't benefit other people. It is really natural for people to want to brush up against boundaries. And so it becomes on us to consistently reinforce them. I think of it almost like, parenting a child, where like you need that consistency in order for them to actually gain the insight or learn from the boundary. and then letting people experience what those natural or logical consequences are. So if you're setting a boundary related to work where you're doing some form of content exchange and somebody is violating your boundaries, yeah, the consequence is going to be you're not going to hire that person again. And maybe they're going to gain a reputation of being somebody who is difficult to work with. Maybe you are that person if you are violating boundaries. And so, again, it's all about that mindful intentionality, recognizing how are you showing up in your work. And so I want to talk about a few case examples. And so I'm going to go through things one by one. I'm going to do it very briefly because there's still a few other things that I want to cover, but just some ways that these strategies might come across in practice. And I also want to start by acknowledging these case examples were just general ones that I've heard from clients, friends, people who are doing this work. And then also, all names are just the names of my D&D characters because that's typically where I pull from when I need fake names and case examples. So if it sounds like I'm talking about an actual experience, I promise it's coincidental. So like we have Guinevere messaged Eliza on Twitter to do a content exchange for a custom video a client requested. Without notice, Amelia backed out due to personal reasons, meaning Guinevere had to refund the client the money they had paid for the custom video. Guinevere is probably going to feel really frustrated in that experience and be really annoyed and have many thoughts and opinions about Eliza. And so there's two different approaches that Guinevere can take in that moment. She can engage the mess or suppress the noise. If she were to take the route of suppressing the noise, maybe she's just moving on with her life, reaching out to somebody else and trying to, maintain that client however possible. She's engaging the mess. Maybe it is using something like that Dear Man approach or those I feel statements and reaching out to Eliza and saying, hey, I was really frustrated when you backed out because it cost me money. What are we going to do about this moving forward? So, just one example of two different ways to do that. We have Roland and Amelia are scheduled to film a scene together. Since Roland didn't know, oh, Wendy, I changed the names. Since Roland didn't know Amelia very well, she looked through her social media page to learn more about her and discovered that he did not like some of her stances on various social issues or the way that she presented herself online. So they're not really meshing well. He's sensing the idea that the chemistry's just not there for whatever reason. He can either call her out and say, hey, I don't love some of the things that you are doing or saying. Maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not. Suppressing the noise might be the route to go and practicing some distress tolerance. I'm here for a job that I have to do. I am approaching it from that goal rather than these disagreements on social media. Then we have Killian and Garfield, who are close friends who both work in the industry. Killian's noticed that he is not liked well on set because he's acting rude and entitled because of recent fame that he has gained in the media. Killian decides to make these observations to Garfield. So Killian's leaning in and engaging the mess and saying, hey, friend, here is what I am noticing. And Garfield can, respond using that Laura method. Maybe he leans in and says something like, you know what, I haven't thought about it that way, and maybe I do need to do something different. Or maybe he wants to do something else or figure out what he wants to reflect on moving forward. And so, just different ways to engage the mess or suppress the noise. And so I want to end before we transition into the panel discussion of just this idea around community care. Community care I think of as like the supplement or the addition to self-care which we are taught to utilize all the time. Like self-care is great and I think accountability is important, but I think community care is how we really create and maintain relationships that are healthy and fulfilling and make us inspired to do this work more. And so the way that I think is one of the best ways to go about implementing community care is first creating your own mission statement, figuring out what is the why for why you do this work. What drew you to this field? What values do you live by in doing this work? What differences are you trying to make in this field, in the industry, in, society at large? What do you see as your goal or purpose? What do you enjoy about the work that you are doing? And I'm not talking about this from the cliche, like job interview, like, why do you want to work here? Like sort of the cliche thing that everyone's kind of taught to put on a resume. I do genuinely mean a thing that is designed for you and your why and what brings you satisfaction. Because if you have that and are able to share that with other people, you're going to find people who also want to do that thing. And friendships and professional connections are often formed through shared ideals, through similar interests. When we think about just like developmentally, we as people, when we're young kids, our friends are just who's in school with us. So, like, people out of convenience or availability. But even within that, we find the people who are similar to us and gravitate towards them because they can help fill our cups or inspire us. It is also much easier to stay motivated towards a particular goal if you have other people who are holding you accountable to that goal, if you have other people who are working with you towards that accomplishing that goal. So take a moment to reflect on what is your mission statement, what draws you to this work, what is the thing that you want to continue doing, and it can look a variety of different reasons. It is whatever is important to you. So, like, I'll give an example and I'll just share my own mission statement. So, as a sex therapist, my mission statement is that sexuality should be celebrated. All people deserve to express in safe and consensual ways what their sexuality means to them, whether it's through their kinks, their actions, their identities, their work, their anything and everything. And then taking that even further, one of the reasons that I do this work is that when sexuality is weaponized or when people experience violent sexual situations, either through policies that are implemented in society or traumatic experiences, I know that I can at least be one person that can help that person feel valued, cared for, and respected. So that drives me, and I have found tons of sex therapist friends who share in that value, and we collaborate with one another. I get referrals from them, they get referrals from me. It is good for business, it is good for mental health, it is good for professionalism. It is having that renewed purpose. And so I was alluding to this earlier, but self-care is good. Community care is great. I think we ultimately need both in any workplace environment to prevent burnout. And so, the same way that you owe it to yourself to take care of other people, you also deserve to have your needs met and owe it to your colleagues to support them. Like I was saying earlier, nobody is an island. We have to form relationships, and these relationships are what's going to help everyone in the long term. So community care can look a lot of different ways. It can be things like checking in with colleagues outside of, work hours, hanging out outside of work hours. It can be when you are both at work, maybe you only cross paths, on set or equivalent, and just checking in. Hey, are you working towards that goal? Putting yourself out there. Hey, can you hold me accountable to doing this thing that I want to do? Hey, can we work together on this really cool project and, motivate and inspire one another? And then lastly, I know this was a lot about like professional colleagues and like friends at work, but I do want to just open the door to, just general non-sex worker friends or people outside of the industry. A lot of times I get questions from my clients that are things like, do I tell my friends who are not doing this what I do? And there's no right or wrong answer. Like, you have to figure out what works best for you and reflect on, what do you hope to gain from that? What do you need as a response? Do you know how to communicate that you need that as a response? Sometimes you get people who are nosy and they ask questions. You have to think about, what are your limits? Do you want to share, videos, writings, whatever you might be putting out into the world with them? I encourage people to think about, putting it back on the other person and asking them, why do you ask? I get this a lot as a sex therapist where people ask me, what's the craziest thing that you've ever heard a client share? And I will always reflect back some version of, usually people ask me that because they want to know if the thing that I've heard that is the most weird is the thing that they're into. So why don't you just tell me what you're into and then I'll let you know if it's weird. And I'll tell you right now, it won't be. And usually that gets people to go, "Ooh, okay, I need to reflect on why I'm asking." And then figuring out, what do you do if friends disapprove? You have to reinforce those boundaries and identify, how are you going to respond? Again, there's no right or wrong answer that is universal across all people. It is going to be specific to the individual. And also, it might be your opportunity to provide education to people who may disapprove, who maybe do have preconceived notions of what sex work is, or, associate it with something that is not sex work, like trafficking, or, whatever the media is trying to push what it is. So, lots of different ways. The overall conclusion to this presentation is that most of the time, work conflicts can be resolved by taking one of two options that have many different strategies embedded with them, of engaging the mess or suppressing the noise. Forming relationships is good for our mental health within this field. We need pleasant experiences with coworkers. We owe it to others to be responsible and be professional because it's good for business. And also, I just have to figure out, reflect on how you are showing up in this work. Is that how you want to be showing up? If it's not, what are you going to do about it moving forward? So, with that, I think I'm almost exactly on time. I have a few minutes where questions, comments, concerns. If we need to take a break before the panel, we can. Actually,
Nigel, thank you so much for this. I don't know if the Q&A bubble is visible to you, so I would love to read you one of the questions that was submitted.
yeah, go for it.
When do you know that it should be an agree to disagree moment, and how should you
Ooh,
approach it so that it doesn't feel like you're giving in?
ooh, that is a fantastic question. And I wish I had a universal answer of like, aha, here's the magic solution. And so I'm going to bring it back to, figuring out what of your values is being challenged in that agree to disagree moment. And so oftentimes, if it's something that just, at our core is the number one most important value, like, no, I cannot accept this, then yeah, you probably got to engage the mess. If it's something that you value that's important to you, like, I'm trying to think of something that is one of my like lower level values and I'm struggling at the moment, but like figuring out, is it something that I'm going to care about 3 minutes from now, 3 hours from now, 3 days from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now? And usually that can be a decision point of like, if it's not a 3 years from now thing, it's probably not that important. Like it feels important. It might be a 3 minute thing. I'm probably going to be mad in 3 minutes. That's not very long. But I hope that's somewhat of an answer. It's the cliche therapist answer of it depends.
Fair, absolutely. I see Dennis in the chat saying thank you. It would be beneficial to others because so much of this applies to all business situations.
Yes, so
Yeah.
true. Like as I was reflecting on like all the literature that is out there, it all reads as if it's like for corporate America and the like most cliche 9 to 5 office job. But really, like this is just how work exists in society. Like there's so many different elements, there's so many different aspects this can show up in. And the
Mm,
more I talk to people in the industry, the more I am realizing that, like, me as a therapist in private practice and them as a sex worker in the industry, functionally, we are doing the same things of like getting coffee together, messaging each other, emailing each other, working with clients together. Like, and something that's so important that I think gets missed a lot of the time is that, like, that capitalist, like, you must get all the clients, you must do all the things, there's not enough to go around. And the reality is there is so much that is able to go around. Like, you are not stealing from other people by, working or by not sharing or working alone. Like, there's always going to be business, there's always going to be need, and figuring out, like, how can we all benefit from this?
mm. It's wonderful that you're saying this right now because I think a lot of uh, that that inner reflection of how do I eliminate this feeling or
Hmm.
how do I handle this feeling of maybe a pressure or an unsettled. This is ideal for our conversation tomorrow, which is going to be about the self relationship. So you're really like you're leading us into that already, which is just so ideal. Thank you for the
Lovely.
presentation. My
Yes, thank
goodness.
you for having me.
So informative, and I'm sure everyone's feeling the same sentiment of, can Nigel just like arrange my life for me? Handle it for me. It's so important to really feel that there are pathways and options for us, especially when navigating conflict like this. I mean, we are so independent in this industry. You know,
Mhm.
it's very much we handle every aspect of the job ourselves. Sure, some folks have management teams, some folks have assistants, but it really those decisions are being made by us as individuals. And so
Yeah.
that can be a lot to decipher.
Hmm. And even figuring out those people that maybe do have the management team, like ask them, how did you get there? Is that something you might want? Like again, going back to the parallels between therapy and sex work, like I know therapists who have, secretaries, management teams, and I'm like, I don't think I could afford that, but clearly you figured something out, so how can I learn from you?
We got another question that just came in. This one's
Ooh.
great, and I actually can't wait to also hopefully bring this to the panel as well. What if someone in my professional field wants to get more personal with me, but I'm not interested? I want to keep it professional.
Hmm. Then I think that's a situation where you've established a boundary. And so if somebody continues to ask you that, you continue to reinforce the boundary by, not sharing whatever that looks like for you in practice.
Mhm.
Like I think that's something that's so important to this field, and I wish I had gone into it more, but I was already at time, and there's only so much time in the day. But like we do have to acknowledge like workplace harassment and how it can easily come into play, and like a lot of what I am talking about here does not apply to like straight up sexual harassment, where like the boundaries are going to look a lot more rigid and different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's that consistency and reinforcement, and you depending on who it is, you can be humble and say like, "Thank you for asking, and I do not share."
Yeah. And we're gonna have this little break to start open the second part of the day. But all of you that are sticking around for the panel, if a question does come up while we continue this conversation, please know that it is absolutely welcome to be putting that either in the Q&A function here on Zoom or in the chat directly. You'll be meeting our panelists. You'll be getting in on some really delicious conversations. We've got a pathway of questions that I've put together, and I'm noticing that some of these questions that have been, I guess, decided upon are also a lot more about friends and friends outside of the professional sphere as well. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I can't wait to hear from these folks. But Nigel, thank you so much for your presentation today. Where can people learn more about you and the work you do?
I mean, I am not on social media. It is just I was raised in the 90s when we were all supposed to be afraid of it, and it just kind of stuck with me. But if you Google my name in St. Louis, I'm like the one. There's two Nigels in St. Louis. I'm the one that does, sex therapy. Send me an email. I'm super personable and I love getting to meet new people. I think I even put it on the first slide. So, all
Amazing.
right,
Amazing.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.